What if one of the most painful experiences a human being can go through could also physically reshape the brain, nervous system, immune system, and even metabolism? Most people think of grief as purely emotional, but grief is biological. It affects sleep, appetite, hormones, inflammation, energy production, attention, memory, and even cardiovascular health. Here's what's really going on inside your body. When humans form deep emotional bonds, the brain creates powerful attachment circuits involving dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and stress regulation pathways. Over time, the nervous system begins treating that person as part of your internal world, part of your safety, part of your routine, part of your identity. And when that bond is suddenly lost through death, separation, divorce, or major life change, the brain experiences something extremely disruptive. Prediction error? The nervous system expects the person to still exist in your reality. But reality no longer matches the brain's internal model. This creates emotional pain, but also physiological stress. Research shows grief can elevate cortisol, disrupt immune function, impair sleep quality, increase inflammation, and even worsen insulin sensitivity in some individuals. This is why grief often feels exhausting physically, not just mentally. Many grieving individuals experience brain fog, fatigue, loss of motivation, digestive problems, appetite changes, poor concentration, sleep disruption, emotional numbness. And importantly, these reactions are not weakness. They are nervous system responses to profound attachment disruption. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your brain like a map built around familiar roads. When someone deeply important disappears, it's like a major bridge suddenly collapsing. The brain keeps trying to travel the old route, but the pathway no longer works. That confusion creates emotional pain, stress, and disorientation. And one of the biggest mistakes people make during grief is believing they should move on quickly. But biologically, healing does not happen through suppression. Healing happens through gradual nervous system adaptation. In today's video, we're going to explore the neuroscience and physiology of grief recovery. We'll discuss how grief changes the brain and body, why sleep and stress regulation become disrupted, how attachment circuits create emotional pain, why social isolation worsens healing, how movement, sunlight, and routines help recovery, and science-backed tools that support nervous system resilience during grief. Because understanding grief biologically often removes unnecessary shame. You begin realizing your body is not malfunctioning. Your nervous system is adapting to loss. And importantly, the brain remains capable of healing. Neuroplasticity does not stop during grief. In many ways, grief itself is a process of neuroplastic change. The nervous system slowly learns how to exist in a new reality. And while that process is painful, it is also deeply human. Before we go deeper into recovery, we need to understand something extremely important. Grief is not just sadness. Grief is an attachment injury inside the nervous system. And the stronger the attachment, the more intensely the brain reacts to separation. Here's what's really going on inside the brain. Human connection is deeply biological. When we bond with someone consistently, the brain builds predictive patterns around their presence. Their voice, their routines, their touch, their messages, their emotional support. Over time, these patterns become neurologically integrated into daily life. This involves several major systems. The dopamine system, linked to motivation and reward. The oxytocin system, linked to bonding and trust. The hippocampus, which stores emotional memories. And the prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate emotional processing. But one of the most important structures involved in grief is the amygdala. The amygdala constantly scans for emotional significance and potential threats. When attachment is disrupted, the amygdala often increases stress signaling dramatically. This is one reason grief can feel physically overwhelming. The nervous system begins entering states of hypervigilance, emotional pain, and physiological stress. What the research shows is that social pain and physical pain share overlapping neural pathways. In other words, the brain processes grief similarly to physical injury. That is not poetic language. That is neuroscience. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your nervous system like a company operating with a key team member for many years. Suddenly, that person disappears without replacement. The entire system becomes unstable. Communication patterns break down, routines collapse. Stress increases. That is similar to what grief does neurologically. The brain temporarily loses part of the structure it depended on emotionally. And this is why grief often affects concentration and memory. Many grieving individuals feel mentally scattered, not because intelligence declines, but because cognitive resources become redirected toward emotional processing and stress adaptation. Now, here's another important biological factor: cortisol. During grief, cortisol levels often remain elevated for prolonged periods. Short-term, cortisol helps the body mobilize energy during stress. But chronically elevated cortisol can impair sleep quality, immune function, digestion, blood sugar regulation, mood stability, and attentional control. This is one reason grief frequently creates exhaustion. The nervous system remains metabolically expensive while processing emotional stress continuously. Now, many people respond to grief by isolating themselves completely. And while temporary solitude can sometimes help emotional processing, prolonged isolation often worsens nervous system dysregulation. Humans regulate stress socially. Safe connection helps calm threat detection systems inside the brain. This is why supportive relationships are strongly associated with better emotional recovery outcomes. Even simple connection matters. Conversation, eye contact, walking with someone, feeling emotionally understood. These signals communicate safety biologically. Now, another major issue during grief is routine collapse. People stop exercising. Sleep becomes irregular. Meals become inconsistent. Sunlight exposure decreases. But the nervous system heals more effectively through predictable biological rhythms. This is why maintaining simple structure during grief matters enormously. Not perfection. Structure. Wake at a consistent time. Hydrate. Walk outdoors. Eat regularly. Move the body gently. These behaviors stabilize physiology even when emotions remain difficult. And here's one of the most important principles in grief recovery. Healing does not mean forgetting. The brain is not trying to erase attachment. The nervous system is learning how to carry the memory differently. And that adaptation takes time, repetition, and nervous system support. One of the most overlooked aspects of grief is how deeply it affects physical health. Because grief is not confined to the mind, it affects the entire body. Here's what's really going on inside your physiology. When emotional stress remains elevated for long periods, the nervous system shifts into a state of chronic survival signaling. Stress hormones increase, inflammation rises, sleep quality declines, recovery systems weaken, and over time, this affects nearly every major biological system. One of the first systems disrupted during grief is sleep. Many grieving individuals experience difficulty falling asleep, frequent waking, early morning awakening, or emotionally intense dreams. Why? Because the brain remains hyperactivated. The nervous system struggles to fully transition into recovery states. And sleep is essential because this is when the brain performs emotional processing, memory consolidation, and nervous system repair. Without proper sleep, emotional regulation becomes dramatically harder. Research consistently shows sleep deprivation increases amygdala reactivity while weakening prefrontal cortex control. In simple terms, the emotional brain becomes louder, while the rational regulatory brain becomes weaker. This is one reason grief often feels emotionally heavier after poor sleep. Now, here's another major factor: inflammation. Studies show prolonged grief can increase inflammatory markers inside the body. And chronic inflammation affects mood, energy, brain function, immune health, and even cardiovascular risk. This helps explain why grief can feel physically painful. The body is carrying stress biologically. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine driving a car constantly in high gear without proper recovery or maintenance. Eventually, the entire system begins wearing down. That's what chronic emotional stress can do physiologically. Now, another major issue is metabolic disruption. Many grieving individuals experience unstable appetite patterns. Some overeat for emotional regulation, others lose hunger completely. Both reactions are common because stress hormones strongly influence metabolism and blood sugar regulation. Elevated cortisol can increase cravings for highly processed foods while also disrupting insulin sensitivity. And unstable blood sugar often worsens anxiety, fatigue, irritability, and emotional instability. This creates a difficult feedback loop. Poor sleep worsens stress. Stress worsens eating behavior. Poor nutrition worsens emotional resilience. And nervous system recovery becomes harder. This is why foundational physiology matters enormously during grief recovery. Simple biological support can significantly improve emotional stability. One of the most effective tools is movement. Exercise helps regulate cortisol, dopamine, serotonin, blood flow, and inflammation. Even gentle walking improves nervous system regulation, especially outdoors. Sunlight exposure also matters tremendously. Morning light helps stabilize circadian rhythm, improve sleep quality, regulate cortisol timing, and support dopamine function. And importantly, grief often disrupts time perception itself. Days begin blending together. Structured routines help restore orientation to the nervous system. Now, hydration and nutrition matter more than many people realize. During prolonged stress, the body consumes more micronutrients and electrolytes. Protein intake becomes especially important because amino acids support neurotransmitter production involved in mood and recovery. Omega-3 fatty acids may also support brain health and inflammation regulation during periods of chronic stress. But here's the key point. These tools do not erase grief. They support the nervous system while healing occurs. Because emotional recovery becomes far more difficult when the brain and body remain physiologically depleted. Now, another important issue is emotional suppression. Many people try staying constantly distracted to avoid grief completely. But unresolved emotional stress often continues activating the nervous system underneath awareness. The goal is not becoming overwhelmed by emotion constantly, but also not avoiding emotional processing entirely. Healthy grieving involves oscillation, moments of processing, followed by moments of recovery. And over time, the nervous system gradually becomes more resilient. Because healing from grief is not about removing love or memory. It is about helping the brain and body adapt to a new emotional reality without remaining trapped in chronic survival mode. Now, here's where grief recovery becomes deeply connected to neuroplasticity. Because the brain is not static, even after profound loss, the nervous system retains the ability to reorganize, adapt, and heal over time. But healing does not happen automatically through time alone. Healing happens through repeated biological and emotional experiences that gradually teach the brain, you are safe enough to keep living. Here's what's really going on inside the brain. When grief first occurs, the nervous system repeatedly activates old attachment pathways. The brain expects the person to still call, still walk through the door, still exist inside daily routines. And every time reality contradicts that expectation, emotional pain resurfaces. This is why grief often comes in waves. Certain places, songs, smells, or memories reactivate attachment circuits instantly. The brain is constantly updating its internal model of reality. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your brain like software built around a specific operating system. When a major attachment disappears, the old software keeps trying to run the previous program. Over time, the nervous system slowly rewrites those patterns, not by deleting memory, but by creating new emotional associations and new pathways forward. That process is neuroplastic healing. Now, one of the most important things research shows is that avoidance slows adaptation. When people avoid all reminders of grief permanently, the nervous system never fully learns that it can experience memory without remaining trapped in survival mode. This is one reason therapeutic approaches involving gradual emotional processing can help recovery significantly. The brain learns safety through exposure combined with regulation, not through endless suppression. Now, this does not mean forcing overwhelming emotional pain constantly. That can become dysregulating too. Healthy processing usually happens in manageable doses, moments of reflection, moments of memory, moments of emotional release, balanced with recovery, movement, connection, sleep, and nervous system regulation. This creates flexibility inside emotional circuitry. Now, here's another extremely important factor, meaning. One of the strongest predictors of long-term resilience after grief is the ability to gradually rebuild meaning and purpose. Because grief often damages identity itself. People lose not only the person, but also routines, roles, future expectations, and emotional structure. The brain begins asking, what now? And while purpose cannot erase grief, meaningful action helps stabilize dopamine systems involved in motivation and forward movement. This is why small goals matter enormously during recovery. Simple behaviors, getting outside, making meals, exercising, connecting socially, working creatively, help signal to the nervous system that life is continuing. And importantly, the brain responds to momentum. Action often precedes emotional improvement, not the other way around. Now let's discuss social support briefly. Humans' healing connection. Safe social interaction regulates the autonomic nervous system through tone of voice, facial expression, eye contact, and emotional safety cues. Isolation tends to amplify rumination and stress physiology. Even brief positive social contact can reduce threat signaling inside the brain. This is why community, therapy, family support, and emotionally safe relationships matter biologically during grief recovery. Now, another major factor is self-compassion. Many grieving individuals criticize themselves for not recovering fast enough. But nervous system healing is highly individual. There is no perfectly linear timeline. Some days feel manageable, others feel overwhelming again. That fluctuation is normal. The brain heals unevenly. And here's one of the most important insights from modern neuroscience. Painful emotions are not evidence of failure. They are evidence of attachment. And over time, with repeated regulation, support, sleep, movement, emotional processing, and healthy routines, the nervous system slowly learns something powerful. You can carry grief without grief controlling your entire biology forever. One of the biggest misconceptions about grief is the idea that healing means getting over someone. But biologically, that is not how the brain works. The nervous system does not simply erase meaningful attachment. Instead, healing involves transforming the relationship between memory, emotion, and physiology. Here's what's really going on inside your brain. When grief is intense, memories often trigger strong autonomic reactions. Heart rate changes, breathing changes, muscle tension increases, stress hormones rise. The brain reacts as if emotional danger is still happening in the present moment. But over time, through repeated safe exposure to memories and emotional processing, the nervous system can begin uncoupling memory from overwhelming stress activation. In simple terms, you still remember, you still care, but the body stops reacting with the same level of survival distress. That is emotional integration. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine touching a physical bruise. At first, even light pressure feels painful, but as healing occurs, the tissue becomes less reactive. The memory of the injury remains, but the nervous system no longer responds with the same intensity. Emotional healing works similarly. Now, one of the most powerful tools for this process is emotional regulation training. Because grief recovery is not about eliminating emotion. It's about increasing the nervous system's ability to experience emotion without becoming overwhelmed by it. This is where breathing practices become extremely useful. Slow cyclic breathing patterns can reduce sympathetic nervous system activation and increase parasympathetic recovery signaling. One particularly effective tool supported by neuroscience research is the physiological sigh. 2 quick inhales through the nose, followed by 1 long, slow exhale. This pattern helps reduce stress physiology rapidly. And importantly, calmer physiology improves emotional processing capacity. Now let's talk about rumination. Many grieving individuals become trapped in repetitive thought loops. What if I had done something differently? Why did this happen? Could I have prevented it? While reflection is natural, chronic rumination often keeps stress circuitry activated continuously. The brain begins replaying pain without resolution. This is why externalizing thoughts can help significantly. Journaling, speaking with trusted people, therapy, or structured emotional expression helps reduce cognitive overload inside working memory systems. The brain processes emotion more effectively when experiences become organized linguistically. Now, another major factor in grief recovery is nervous system safety. Healing accelerates when the body repeatedly experiences signals of safety and stability. This includes consistent sleep, stable routines, movement, hydration, sunlight exposure, social support, and reduced overstimulation. These behaviors seem simple, but biologically they create the conditions required for recovery. Because the brain heals best in environments that feel physiologically predictable. Now, here's another important principle. Grief often changes priorities permanently. Many people notice shifts in relationships, career goals, identity, or emotional values after profound loss. This is not necessarily dysfunction. Sometimes grief reorganizes perspective. Pain forces the brain to reevaluate meaning, time, connection, and purpose. And while that process is difficult, it can also create emotional depth and resilience over time. What the research shows is that humans are remarkably adaptable, not because suffering disappears, but because the nervous system can learn to carry difficult experiences while still building connection, joy, meaning, and emotional stability again. And this is why hope matters biologically. Hope changes behavior. Behavior changes neurochemistry, and repeated behavioral change reshapes the brain itself. Now let's bring everything together into practical daily tools for healing from grief and rebuilding nervous system stability over time. Because information alone does not heal the brain, repetition does. Environment does, behavior does, and one of the most important things to understand is this. Healing from grief is not about forcing yourself to feel better. It is about gradually teaching the nervous system that safety, connection, purpose, and regulation are still possible again. Here's what's really going on biologically. Your brain is constantly adapting to repeated experiences. Every routine, every sleep cycle, every conversation, every stress response, every recovery behavior, all of it shapes neural circuitry. This means small, consistent behaviors matter enormously during grief recovery. Now, one of the most powerful things you can do is rebuild circadian stability. Wake at a relatively consistent time. Get sunlight exposure early in the day. Move the body regularly. Reduce excessive nighttime stimulation. These behaviors help regulate cortisol, dopamine, melatonin, sleep quality, and emotional stability. And emotional regulation becomes much harder when circadian rhythms remain disrupted. Now let's talk about movement again, because this is one of the strongest natural antidepressant and stress regulation tools available. Exercise increases dopamine, serotonin, BDNF, blood flow, and stress resilience. Importantly, movement also gives emotional energy somewhere to go physically. Grief creates physiological activation inside the body. Walking, strength training, stretching, or even gentle movement can help metabolize some of that stress signaling. Now, another critical tool is social connection. Humans are biologically wired for co-regulation. Supportive relationships help calm the nervous system through voice tone, eye contact, emotional safety, and connection. This does not mean forcing constant socialization, but prolonged isolation often worsens emotional suffering over time. Even brief moments of genuine connection matter. Now let's discuss emotional processing. Many people swing between two extremes, complete suppression or complete emotional flooding. Neither extreme is ideal long-term. Healthy grieving usually involves rhythm, moments of feeling, moments of recovery, moments of reflection, moments of rest. The nervous system heals best through flexibility. Now, another powerful practice is reducing unnecessary overstimulation. During grief, the brain is already processing enormous emotional load. Constant noise, doom scrolling, social media overload, and chronic stress exposure can further dysregulate the nervous system. Creating periods of quiet becomes extremely restorative. Even short moments, walking outdoors, breathing slowly, journaling, or sitting without stimulation can help calm stress circuitry significantly. Now, here's one of the most important ideas from this entire discussion. You do not heal grief by erasing attachment. You heal by learning how to continue living while carrying love and memory differently. That process takes time, and importantly, healing is rarely linear. Some days feel strong. Some days feel heavy again. That does not mean progress disappeared. Neuroplastic healing often happens gradually beneath awareness. Now, here's the challenge I want to leave you with. Choose one nervous system support behavior today. Maybe it's getting sunlight after waking, taking a walk, calling someone supportive, improving sleep consistency, practicing slow breathing, writing your thoughts down instead of suppressing them. Small repeated actions compound biologically over time. And over time, the brain begins learning something powerful. Life can still contain meaning, connection, calm, purpose, and even joy again. Not because the loss disappears, but because the nervous system adapts. If this video added value, like the video and subscribe to join others optimizing their brain, emotional health, nervous system, recovery, and long-term well-being naturally through science-based tools and practical neuroscience. And as always, thank you for watching.